All right, folks, here we are again. Gourd is in the house. We're going to do a first time watching reaction review conversation. And Scott Pilgrim, I know it's one of those where many of you are like, what? What is going on? And I'm like, well, just to be full transparent, it is me who's never seen this. So I have a lot of explaining to do to some of you, I'm certain. But Gourd, my friend, thanks for doing this, brother. I appreciate you hanging out with me.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me. I'm obviously kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum where I didn't even really have to fully rewatch this
Mm.
to be able to go over it. I've seen this movie kind of many times. Really, ever since the first time I watched it, it's become regular viewing in my household. So yeah, it's a movie that is among my favorites. I'm curious what a first time watcher of it today would say about it, but yeah, I've watched this a lot. I'm a big
Okay.
Edgar Wright fan, so and I do think this is one of his better crafted films.
Yeah. So, all right. So the story goes that I remember sitting down to watch this at some point, not in the theaters, at home, some way, shape, or form, cable. I don't know. And I wasn't in the mood for this style of film at that moment. With the anime feel, the video game feel, the cheesiness, cheekiness, just all of that. I wasn't in the mood. So I watched probably a few minutes and turned it off. And then I remember seeing clips and advertisements and people's reactions and stuff, and just couldn't get into watching it. And it
Mm.
just sort of kind of sat on the shelf and just never got done. And time goes by, and I think my son liked it, and I gave it to him, and just never had it again. Never watched it. I'm going to be completely honest. For whatever reason, I totally forgot Edgar Wright directed this.
Oh wow.
Totally forgot that he co-wrote it. The only stuff I had in it was very big picture stuff. Like I knew about the Brie Larson part because people always talk about she wasn't bad in this, and then they talk about everything else that she's done in the last couple of years. I obviously knew Michael Cera was in it, but if you had asked me any of the other stuff like Brandon Routh, um, Chris Evans,
Hmm.
even Jason Schwartzman, nope, would have had nothing. Wouldn't have had nothing for you. And Kieran Culkin is I sort of have this new appreciation for Kieran Culkin because I realize he may only be playing one character or a modified version of a character that he plays in this movie and in Secession, and I got to see he just got an Oscar. But in that role, he is phenomenal to watch on screen. I was so engaged and enjoying the Wallace scenes.
Yeah.
I was blown away.
Yeah,
Um,
this was definitely the role of his where I was like, oh, like, 'cause I remembered him as a kid because
sure.
he's Macaulay Culkin's cousin in the
Yep.
Home Alone movies.
Yep.
Uh, it's seeing him in this, I was like, oh wow, he can act. He's got some charisma and some stage presence. So yeah, I can absolutely see that.
Have you seen Secession?
Not yet, no. I want to watch it, but I have heard that there are I remember the EFAP guys talking about it, and they loved it until the last season. They said they kind of hated the last season, though I've heard other people say they absolutely loved the last
Yeah,
season.
I hated
So
the last season. I'm with the EFAP guys. I thought the ending was just it derails for me long before the final season.
yeah.
It struggles from the who am I supposed to be rooting for problem. Doesn't quite know what it wants to do, and then by the time
Hmm.
you get to like the third season or so, I feel like they're just recycling pieces backwards. Like we're taking a story, and then it's like he doesn't really progress anymore. It becomes a character, ends up back here,
Mm.
and Kieran Culkin's role is probably one of the ones that I was kind of rooting for. And they just sort of like at times just put him on a shelf. And I'm like, I thought we were going to twist and turn this direction and create new unraveling of things. So he is phenomenal in that season, in that show. He deserves all those accolades. I have not seen this new movie that he had won an Oscar for. I don't even, off the top of my head, even know what it was. But he was definitely a bright spot for me. And
Hmm.
I will say, I've watched this movie twice over the
Oh.
last week, I guess, or so. I have the date written down on my list. I don't know if any of you out there remember. I have a list going of everything I watched this year, so all the movies and TV. So I don't exactly know the date on the first watch. It was at least a week ago, and I will say it was refreshing to have something this fun to watch right now. So
Hmm.
I was really engulfed by a lot of the one-liners and the silliness and the cheekiness. It had like Zoolander feel in the middle of like video game and comic book adaptation stuff. And then the subtext that Edgar Wright is really good at in other movies comes through with like nerdy rom-com romance relationship stuff dealing with crisis and emotions and all that stuff. So that's what I think makes this movie really, really solid, and it'll be kind of fun to unpack with you for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's a movie that, Edgar Wright, one of his things he's very well known for is his really interesting and sharp editing style. And it's interesting. I almost look at this sort of as like a predecessor to Baby Driver in certain respects, because Baby Driver is kind of like a pseudo musical in the way it utilizes music and editing to tell its story. I think this one does really the same thing. So it's almost like, I almost view this similar to a musical in various respects. I mean, not quite as much. It's not using music in particular to drive its plot forward, but there are a lot of scenes that use music to do this. So, yeah, I think it's cool to watch this and then to follow it up with Baby Driver. And obviously this movie does, music is a huge part of it, definitely, because I mean we've got, the Battle of the Bands thing going, and then that culminates into a really, really cool literal battle of bands later in the film. But yeah, this is actually a really cool one to watch alongside that one, to see how his style evolves from this one to that one.
Yeah, no, I had a good time from that. I love that it opens in sort of like the misdirection for me. Like again, I'm cold, right? I don't know anything. I don't really know what I'm getting myself into. The fact that they're playing with it's a dude and he's in this band, and the relationship's going to be with this young girl that's 17, and that's where all the mockery is coming from. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not a massive fan of the Michael Cera. He's me, the nerd. He's the nerdy me. He's not like any of the manly characteristics that I also like. He's completely void of. I mean, look, I'm being mocked regularly for my look. I get it. Like, so, yeah, Vex is like, you're nearly unrecognizable with a hat on. I'm like, well, no, I get the Santa Claus thing. I'm leaning more into this time of the year. I look like I could be the next captain for Deadliest Catch. I totally get that. But I don't feel connected to Michael Cera as the nerd in me. Other than like, when he's doing like a super bad type movie where I feel like it's just like a kid, I don't, okay, that's a fun experience. This one with the relationship stuff, I feel like I was able to connect to some of it, and I was caught off guard because I didn't know that the sort of like the turn was coming, that he was really after the purple hair girl, Ramona Flowers. Yes,
Ramona Flowers. Yeah. I think it's interesting because there's a lot of people who dislike this movie. I think one of the big sticking points for them is Michael Cera's character, because he is kind of his character is sort of indicative of how slowly certain men grow up these days. And I think if you mistake his character for being something of a role model, I think like if you think that's what the movie is trying to portray, it's like you'll probably dislike the movie altogether. But I don't think the movie at all is trying to portray him as a role model. I think the movie is part of the point of the movie is that he's on a character arc where he's kind of having to grow up. I mean, there's this little moment where he gains, quote unquote, the power of self-respect, and it's interesting that takes priority and is considered greater for him than gaining the power of love before that in the previous sequence. I remember seeing that the first time and I was like, yep, okay, I get what you're selling here. And it's it makes sense, because like he's in no way a role model. A lot of this, you kind of think for the whole time this movie is just about him trying to get this girl, but in reality, that's kind of secondary to him needing to kind of man up. It's like, dude, you really need to man up. You need to start taking responsibility for your life and for your choices. And it's interesting that that's kind of the kind of the main message of the movie, despite the fact that it's sort of underlying the majority of the movie. It's like it's really not until you rewatch it that you realize how prevalent that is throughout. You're kind of just watching it at first and you're seeing on the surface he's just after this girl, so you think that's the main point. But yeah, it's like he's not he's probably a little bit more relatable to my generation. He'd probably be even more relatable to the generations that followed, because like, yeah, we do see a lot of men. It takes a lot longer, it seems, for a lot of men these days to grow up and to start taking responsibility for themselves.
I think that the chasing the girl part, I'm okay with that being the plot device and the mechanism, because I think what it's doing is it's instigating conversations in such a great way, and again, way ahead of its time. This is 2010, right?
Oh yeah,
so way ahead of its time for this conversation and the generations that are following.
And I think that's a part that makes it that's the part that is relatable, I think, to most people, because all pretty much all men can understand and can relate to, you know, chasing a girl. You know, we can pretty much all relate to that.
What it's doing, I think, though, especially from a nerdy perspective, is it's like, okay, you're not the manliest dude. Definitely not the manliest dude she's probably ever dated. You're probably going to have awkward conversations about her exes, what she's done. It deals with, you know, her being bi-curious, and she's always the dumper, not the dumpee. As far back as like obsessed people from like middle school, I mean, definitely can relate to growing up with people who are like, yeah, I dated so and so in like an 8th grade, and you're like, dude, we're seniors now. What are you talking about? Like, what? Like, I don't even acknowledge what happened in middle school as really being relevant to my life as I transitioned from high school into college. But there were people that were like that, like, oh yeah. So I think that the brilliance of the film is almost like all of this relationship / romance 101 stuff, not just for the generation, but also because it's done through the lens of this nerd person. I don't know how much therapy there was for O'Malley that wrote the comic book, and Edgar Wright, who helped co-write the screenplay, because I feel like this stuff feels like someone's lived through it. Like, you left me for a vegan.
Yeah.
Like, you you know what I mean? Yeah, I got to run into my ex in some place, and it's like, it's just, and faced with your ally, like the ex that dumped you, you're heartbroken over, then you're face to face, and she kind of like, yeah, I kind of like want to get back to you, kind of. It's like, I've already moved on. Do I want to go backwards? It is really dealing with a lot of complexity that is under the surface of all of the craziness that's actually happening on screen.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's yeah, and like I said, I totally agree with you. The using a romance to drive the plot forward and to drive home those lessons is I think it is overall a great choice. And you know, the way, like, Edgar Wright is almost deceptive how good a storyteller he is, because I mean, if you look at this, you look at Shaun of the Dead, you look at Hot Fuzz, you know, his more famous movies, his stories generally are pretty simple, but they excel in like setup and payoff. And the more you watch them, like, I find his best movies to be highly rewatchable. Like, Baby Driver's the one that probably got him the most accolades. I don't consider that one of his best. I think it's really good. Don't get me wrong. I think Baby Driver is really, really good. And but I almost look at that oddly as more of an entry level Edgar Wright movie, because I do think I guess my issue with Baby Driver is it's a little less substantive than the previous movies he had done, such as this or the Cornetto trilogy. I think all 4 of those are more substantive movies than Baby Driver. And I honestly don't think Last Night in Soho is very good at all. I think that's easily the weakest movie he's done. But what I really appreciate how in such simple stories he weaves in some really interesting themes that have excellent setup and payoff, that are mostly portrayed just like in the characters and in how they grow. And a lot of that's often just, you know, ends up being achieved in like dialogue or just in the way like relationships progress and whatnot. He's really, really good at that. And it saddens me that this movie came and went and did really poorly at the box office. I didn't see this at the movies. I remember the first time I heard of this movie was, I think I'd walked in, I was hanging out in GameStop and somebody had brought this movie up and I was like, I've never even heard of this.
Mm.
What is this? Never heard of the comic, wasn't familiar with it, but someone brought up this movie that does this, and that. And I thought, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. But it was out of the theater almost immediately after that. I mean, it flopped hard and left fast, but it was kind of just always in the back of my head. And then probably within about a year of its release, I found out that Edgar Wright had directed it, and I was like, oh, well, then I absolutely need to see it because I love his work. So I bought it, and I remember I was walking out of my house to go to work, and my brother and I lived together at the time, and he put it on, and like I ended up standing in the doorway watching probably the first 10 minutes of it, and I was like, I'm gonna be late. But I'm finding it hard to tear myself away. Like there was part of me that's like, I almost want to call into work just so I can watch this because it hooked me from the outset. I was like, dang it, I really want to stay here and watch this. This looks really, really good.
I will say too that what hooked me to was that it never stopped giving me something else to think about and contemplate. It was it was taking little romantic and relationshipy tropes and kept moving them forward. And then we get to what I think the trailer really got sort of obsessed about, or at least kind of got into, was the whole 7X thing, right? So we have 7 deadly X's. I just think that the trailer is highlighting some of the more goofy elements and things that are not for everyone. It's got a lot of anime feels in the trailer, obviously video game elements in the trailer. Michael Cera is not really like the A-list alpha male character. Is going to get butts in seats for that reason. She's not played off as being overtly pretty or sexy, or she's so. I think that it bombing in the theater was definitely kind of a consequence of a lot of that in a lot of ways, and that maybe if people knew what it was, I got to be honest, I feel like it would do better in a re-release now than it would have done at the time. You know what I mean? It feels like it just, I'm not sure the world wanted this in 2010. I'm not sure the world understood. I just don't think
it's a hard movie. It's a hard movie to sell, especially back in 2010 when movies were. But sorry, shoot, if you put this out today, I think it would blow most people's minds. It would be significantly better than the vast majority of what we're getting today. But yeah, back in 2010, this was, I imagine, a pretty hard. I mean, it is a hard sell. This is it's a strange film. Conceptually, it's got this whole. It's like, yeah, he's part of this band. They're doing a ballad bands. You're like, okay. It's like, oh, and he's after this girl. It's like, okay, I've seen that kind of thing before. And I guess the selling point is he has to battle 7 Eluxes. I'm like, okay, that could be fun, I guess. But what's weird is also though, I really don't remember this movie being marketed all that much. So I kind of wonder if they had a whole lot of money to work with to advertise it, or if maybe the studio just wasn't, that they just didn't believe in it that much. I mean, Universal was the distributor, so part of me thinks that they probably just didn't believe in it that much, because I was a very, very frequent moviegoer back then. I mean, went to the movies all the time. I don't think I ever saw a preview for this, not once. I don't think I ever saw even one. Like this, like I said, when I heard that this was in theaters, I was like, I have no idea what movie this is that you're even talking about. I have heard nothing about it, which for me, that would be very, very rare. I mean, movies like Anora, I saw previews for, and that movie, while obviously it didn't flop because it cost a lot less to make, its box office numbers are pretty similar. But I remember they advertised the heck out of that in theaters. This I never saw anything for.
I'm trying to see what else it was up against. I think that might be the other factor, because it started off so bad. It started off in like 5th place, and after a couple of weeks, it was out of the top 10. So I'm trying to get to its open.
Because this, well, I mean, it opened in, let's see, it says, that's
August. Expendables was number 1. Eat, Pray, Love, The Other Guys, which is, I believe, that's
Mark Wahlberg. Will Ferrell,
yeah. And then Inception was still fizzling out at the theaters in week 5. It was still, but you know, that's Despicable Me was drawing younger viewers away. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and it
August.
seems like August is
It's in
not
a
a
dead
bad.
zone. Well, it's a
Yeah.
dead zone for school. It used to be worse than it is now. Like, so again, media landscape's so different now. But if I rewound the clock to the normal cycles where January, February were these dead drop zones because of Oscar stuff, right? It's kind of like it's a cheat system to put like things they know they're going to bomb, whatever. And then the very end of summer, the August into September, because parents are like, no, we're not going to the movies. We got to buy stuff for school. We got to get kids prepped for school. And of course, they've changed when people go back to school so much. So it makes it unpredictable. And that's a pretty tough billing to kind of go up against. It went up against Expendables and Eat, Pray, Love opening weekends and the second week for the other guys. So it's not as though it had a landscape to do kind of
Which,
like
if
there was
anyone
no.
if anyone out there is wondering, Eat, Pray, Love, I like the interesting thing is this movie, I would say almost certainly has a bigger cultural footprint than Eat, Pray, Love. But Eat, Pray, Love was a big deal when it came out.
Well, it
Eat,
made
Pray,
like
Love
$200
was,
million. I mean, it was a
yeah,
lot of. It
yeah.
made
I
a
mean,
lot of money back then. It was a
based
huge
on
deal
a
at the time.
yeah, it was based on a really popular book, and it's one that'll like you said, $200 million. It a lot of people were seeing it back then. Granted, nobody talks about it now, pretty much, but
I think
back then it's like, yeah, it
all
was
right,
kind of a big
I'm
deal.
gonna correct Gord because I guarantee if I poll all of my coworkers, Eat, Pray, Love is that perfect relationship breakup, find yourself after divorce, and kind of feeling for most women. They love that movie to this day. They would
I mean,
watch it
I'm
because
sure with
yeah,
women, it's
yeah,
probably
this
one,
is.
but I don't hear women talk about it ever, to be
I don't
honest.
think women talk about. Most women are not like into talking about movies the same way do they are
Maybe not,
into.
yeah.
It's most women are not cinemaphiles, right? So there's not a lot of Vexes and Nadias that I'm next to, and most of them are like, what's new on Netflix or what's new on this, and they're into have you seen. And if they were going through the breakup stuff and they're consoling one another, Eat, Pray, Love would probably, and I think that's the cultural footprint. Like that's its legacy. Pretty Woman's a similar kind of movie where it's like most people are not going to talk about Pretty Woman, but then they want to talk about Princessy and oh my God, you know, yeah, they would talk about Pretty Woman. They could all watch it. Like I don't. It's kind of a weird thing for me too, dude. I totally can't always relate because I'm the, you know, I literally have a log of what I'm watching on TV and movie. I mean, literally, my wife thinks I'm crazy. Like, this is nuts. Yeah, yeah. And I couldn't get her to watch this. She didn't want to watch this. She was like, yeah, she was mad on watching it with me. So it just kind of shows there is something there about, you know, why I didn't do well. And I want to go back because I that's on the frame. The other thing too is, and you know, again, not to get myself canceled, but reality is 2010 mouth to mouth gay kiss, gay representation. It was different, new, and uh, it was great. It was done so well. Wallace is a fantastic character. It was hysterical. Him calling the carpet to anyone that criticizes him. Oh man, I loved this character, and it was one of my favorite elements of. I won't say my favorite elements in the movie because the movie is so full of all sorts of dynamic things that are out there, but when it comes to the meat of the story and that kind of thing, for me, that was a place that I landed and I really enjoyed a lot. So
What's fun about Wallace's character is okay. It's you obviously you can't divorce the fact that he's gay from his character because that is something that is brought up a lot when he's around. Probably just about every scene he's in, but it's not afraid to make fun of that at the same time. It's like it's used for comedy as much as it is an aspect of his character, but not in a way that's like harsh or mean or anything. Like it's funny that they actually give him the distinction when he's first introduces, this is my cool gay roommate Wallace.
yep.
Like in a lot of ways, like he's one of the cooler male characters in the movie. He's played with this kind of above it all kind of nonchalance. Like he's one of the more intelligent characters. He's one of the more insightful ones. But they play up the fact that he's gay in a way that's often really funny. So yeah, it's not done in a way where it feels like any form of like messaging
No,
or
it's not. It's not messaging or denigration. I don't think at
yeah,
all. I think it's just this is
the character, and Really every character is utilized for comedy in some form or fashion. It's just like, yeah, he's just as much utilized for comedy. It's just the tone's different with all of them. And yeah, his scenes are particularly good. And Kieran Culkin absolutely nails it. Like I said, when I first saw this, I was like, dang, this kid, I didn't know he was this good an actor. He's really good.
Culkin's in for real.
Yeah, this was a movie where after I watched it, I was like, I hope he gets more work moving forward because he's really good, and I'm glad to see that. Like, 'cause I think one of the next things I saw him pop up in was he was really briefly in I think it was the second season of Fargo, where, like I said, I think he was only in maybe an episode, but he had a pretty important role in that, and I was like, okay, that's something, that's cool. But then he popped up in Succession, and now he's got an Oscar to his name, and I'm like, yeah, keep giving this kid work because he's pretty dang good. He is pretty good.
Yeah, he was fantastic, and yeah, Roman Roy is a great character, and it was really fun to see that manifest and give him that kind of opportunity to break out and have accolades, and then kind of call his own shots, get an Oscar too. So we'll see how things play out for him. I briefly showed the clip because I was just really wanting to show love. I had a lot of fun. I mean, I'm not gonna. This stuff was fun. The video game elements and the cheekiness of it all, and it was done in a nice way for someone like Pops, because it was a slow going thing. It didn't just jump into things for me. Like the first defeat was the Bollywood guy, and I was kind of like, eh. And then when the coins fall, he picks them all up. It's like $2.40. They have a joke. That's not even enough to get the bus ride home. But okay, so the coins, even in the silliness of it all, is even made fun of. And then by the time we get to the end of the movie, when we start to have, this intensity, it's been elevated with the bands and Gideon, and it becomes more of an actual, like, quite literally, battle of the bands where they're going to actually die. I was all on board. I was still good. I was all on board. I'm rooting for them to win. I'm rooting for the solution. And then it really delivered, I think, and you talked about it earlier, all of that heart and oomph and morality that makes it, to me, it elevates it to being a really good film, where it's like, okay, it's not just about this journey and this is the stuff that happens. It's like, oh no, wait, here's a sort of self-respect. And, it's like, oh, okay, I see what you guys are doing now. You're really on the nose. And then it reconciles itself, but he has to come in face to face. Well, it's a callback, right? So the early scene is, Wallace is the voice of reason to say, no, you got to break up with Knives. You have to break up. Yet, oh, it's hard, man. I don't want to do it. I'm like, oh my gosh. And there's so many people, even now into their adult life, it's like they just don't want to deal with things hard like that. And at the end of the movie, he's just like, nope, I did you wrong. I did you wrong. I did this wrong. I'm like, man, this is really good. That's a really good man up speech and messaging for folks. So I think that's one of the things I think you definitely loved about this film for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there is an alternate ending they filmed where he does end up with Knives, and there's a lot of people who think that's the better of the two endings. And anytime I've conversed with such people, I'm like, honestly, it's like, I understand why you think that, because Knives is probably, she's the better of the two love interests, but kind of the point is that is kind of too good for Scott in a way. It's like he kind of doesn't deserve her. She's a bit more pure, a bit more wholesome. It's like, and he's wronged her severely. But at the same time, it's like, okay, she may be the better of the two options, but is she the best person for him? It's not necessarily, I don't want to frame it as though, him and Ramona are best because he should just settle for her because that's what he deserves. It's like, no, I think Ramona is a better match for him. But Knives is someone who's kind of a bit too pure, doesn't belong kind of in his world in that respect. So like her character growth is, learning not to latch on too much to the first guy she ever fell for. So she has an interesting little arc. It's part of what I like about Edgar Wright movies is that a lot of, like, pretty much every character he's got going in, he utilizes them for other arcs, or they have their own little arcs. And Knives is somebody who does have, I think, a pretty cool arc.
Really good arc,
and
indeed.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad that the two of them don't end up together, because I was like, I really don't think he and her should be together. I don't
I
think
don't
that
think it
really
even.
matches the feel of the movie and matches the lessons they're teaching in the movie. I think that would be almost too good a reward for him.
Again, I don't know the comic book. I mean, obviously there's like so many volumes of it, so I know. I mean, I've read pieces of it, but I'm not like up to date on, does he get Ramona and
Me
keep
neither.
Ramona? But I love the fact that it gives me the idea he's going to chase after Ramona, but it doesn't give me a say anything, Andy, cue the '80s music, they're going to live happy ever nonsense. It just says, oh, he's going to chase Ramona. Okay, fine. So I loved all of that. It didn't
Mhm.
spoon feed me a bunch of sugar. It just did. And look, he hits all the stuff. I want to go back because I want to hit on um, this one in particular because
Yeah, I think the ending really what's cool about in that aspect is the fact that it really just seems to suggest that he and Ramona are going to that they're kind of
try.
getting fresh starts with one another.
Mhm. There's no
And
X's. It's in the past. We both have
yeah,
overcome all that, and let's
it's
see
like
if we can have a relationship
yeah,
now or not. Right? They didn't
we
wake
can
up
both
in
kind of
bed
move
together.
on.
They
Yeah,
didn't.
we
Yeah,
can
it
both kind of
wasn't.
move on
Yeah.
from our past, but take
Hmm.
another shot together. And I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's actually that fits both characters' arcs really, really well. I think they're, uh, like you said, it's an ending and oddly sort of reminds me of the ending of Son-in-Law, which I think is kind of an underrated rom-com. One of the things I appreciate about that movie is the fact that it never fully uh commits to Pauly Shore's character and Carla Gugino's character really getting together, but it suggests that it's a possibility that
Mm.
it could happen. And I think this does something similar. I do think this is a superior movie pretty much in every way. But
I'm
yeah,
gonna.
it's
I'm
giving
gonna
you an
take.
ending that does something like that.
I'm gonna take note that Gord likes Son-in-Law. So when
Very much.
Thanksgiving comes around, they're all trying to get me to watch Son-in-Law. I'm gonna be like, well, I'm gonna make Gord come in because he's gonna help you guys sell this movie to me because I just can't do Pauly
Yeah.
Shore. I'm just over it. I'm good. I lived through the Encino Man era. I'm done. Biodome came to me in part of a
Ugh.
package of
Ugh.
things for free to review. I lasted maybe 15 or 20 minutes and just like, no, I'm not reviewing this movie. I'm just not.
I
No.
was
It's like a
inundated
big
with
zero.
yeah.
It
I was
is. Mm,
I
mm.
mean, Encino Man I didn't mind so much growing up.
It
I
seems fun.
despise
I've not.
Biodome. I
Yeah, I'm not watching it.
despise Biodome. Yeah, fun little trailer. I would say this the way they filmed that Battle of the Band scene with the giant monsters and just for the visual spectacle. And that's one thing that it's interesting that it becomes kind of secondary to the conversation with this movie is the visual spectacle of this movie is really, really on point. It has this movie has really tremendous visual flair. I mean, and it was expensive. It was a relatively expensive movie, $60 million budget back in 2010. That wasn't small potatoes the way it kind
Nope.
of is
It's a lot
now.
of money.
But
Did he bite off
visuals are
more than he
used
could chew?
really well.
How do you think they held up? I thought the effects held up better than I expected.
Oh yeah, they're not
There are
overdone. They're not overdone.
no, and they fit my video game comic booky world that we're playing in.
Hmm.
So I don't feel like anything kind of got away from them. You know what I mean? I feel like I don't know. I just feel like everything pieces together well for
Hmm.
me for an era and what they're trying to do by having a manga feel. Okay, look, all right. Let me find something to criticize. Let me go back and find it in the trailer. Where's the Bollywood scene? They briefly have a shot of it. That was my least favorite visually. It was this was my least favorite visually of them dancing, and I just thought it was just visually not. It didn't work. It was the one scene for me where I was like, how I got myself into a movie I'm not going to enjoy. I felt like that because it's the first X. I also feel like the X's with the twins was just so fast. It just went by. And I feel like the movie drags a little bit by having seven X's. And we probably could have just not had the twins and maybe done five. And the Bollywood guy maybe could have had another X. Like maybe there was an X that was in one of the bands or something. So we could have gotten two out of the way to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit, because I felt like 7 was a little bit. So those are my criticisms of the Bollywood piece and the Exorcist part, and how that kind of impacted things for me.
I mean, I don't mind the Bollywood. I think it's a good entry. I think it's more or less a fine entry to the concept of him having to fight the evil exes. And it's as far as the fights go, it's probably the easiest one he does, which, I mean, that fits kind of the video game feel. I mean, yeah, stylistically, it's odd because I think it's utilizing some of the certain Bollywood tropes and everything that make it to an American audience feel really odd and bizarre. And it's like, this is okay. This is a weird character, and this scene is very strange. But it seems more or less aware of that. As far as the twins go, it's like I'm. Like, there's kind of an internal conflict with me, because on the one hand, I sort of agree with you. They're not really characters. They're just kind of, they show up late in the movie and they have to battle them. But at the same time, I get why they're not really given too much characterization, because at this particular point in the movie, she and Scott aren't together. They're, she's kind of under the sway of Gideon. And that Battle of the Band sequence really is one of my favorite just isolated moments to, like, on a visual level. I think it's good. I love the way the music is utilized. I think it's a really cool to watch scene. So that part of the movie doesn't drag for me, but it's nowhere near as meaningful. It almost kind of acts as sort of a first round between him and Gideon, because Gideon's kind of just using the twins to try to slow him down.
Okay.
So fine. I guess I would like them to have more characterization to give that fight a little bit more meaning, at least for them. But yeah, we learn nothing about them. They're there to fight him. I do love the fight sequence itself. I think it's really, really cool.
There's fun stuff. There was fun stuff. Let me ask about again, I mentioned briefly, I did not know Chris Evans. If it had clicked in 2010, those files were deleted or lost, guys. I was taken back. Him not taking himself particularly seriously. This being in this sort of like heyday of the lead into Marvel, where he was, signing in to be part of the Marvel universe and what was going to happen over there. And
yeah, I think
obviously knew, Johnny Storm. It'd already been Johnny Storm and the Fantastic Four, that kind of thing. I want to ask you about a movie. Let's go back to here. He's in a film called The Losers, which is a comic book adaptation I've never seen. Have you heard of Losers before?
I've heard of it. I have not seen it up to the point of seeing this movie. I think at this point I had probably seen the first Avenger. I do remember, like, when I saw Chris Evans is in this movie, I reacted like, "Oh, that's Chris Evans." I'm pretty sure the movies I was obviously familiar with the fact that he was in the Fantastic Four, though I've never bothered watching the Fantastic Four movies. But I remember him pretty prominently in the trailers. I knew he was Johnny Storm. Probably the only
great in this. And this was a perfect.
Oh, he was hilarious
for this.
He's
as
really
a brand
funny.
for him, of not taking him to being kind of like a muscle guy, not taking him to being a Hollywood. It was a perfect role, and he's really, really funny. I mean, it's like the two movies I was familiar with him. The two movies I was familiar with that he had been at this point was, like I said, I'm pretty sure I'd watched Captain America at this point, because that came out the following year, and I think I saw it first. And he was also in the Danny Boyle movie Sunshine, which is obviously much more serious, and he is really good in that. But then he pops up in this, and he's hilarious. He's like one of these like uber macho, almost like his style of acting is more like the 80s action movie hero. But he has all these little all these little movements and little things he does, like blowing off his knuckles after a fight, like after they get the spray bottle and stuff. And I mean, just all these little comedic touches, which, granted, a lot of that is, from Edgar Wright. I mean, he does that kind of thing. But I didn't think
Chris Evans, it fits him perfectly. Huh?
Captain America out yet when this came out? I thought Captain America
No,
was
no,
after
Captain
this.
America did come after this, but I didn't see
Oh,
this
okay.
movie until after it was already out. So I
Oh,
think
okay. Gotcha.
I saw
Right.
Captain America probably within a few months of it first releasing on Blu-ray, and then
Right.
I think I saw this not long after.
Right. He has a lot of good roles in small movies where he's not the lead. I'm not
Mhm.
always enjoying him as a lead. So I'm just curious on some other stuff. Like I know I've never seen that Losers movie. I remember watching one time the Iceman movie with Michael Shannon, and I remember he's in that, but I don't remember enough about it to give it really a fair shake. But that was
Yeah,
really good.
I mean he's been in other stuff. I mean granted I thoroughly despise Knives Out. I think that's one of the most overrated movies of the 2010s.
Yeah, I'm not.
He is really I he's good in the Iceman, though I don't think the Iceman's particularly good. I've read the book that's based on. I think they could have made a much better film out of it. Uh, what
I
was
do
the
so.
other
Yeah,
one?
because that guy is a completely. If you there are whole
Oh,
documentaries on the Iceman guys, and he is a crazy, creepy,
oh yeah.
disturbing. Serious. I mean, it is.
Like even if he wasn't truthful about the stuff he did, you have to be
Oh,
pretty messed up to do some of the stuff even that he suggested. But yeah, the book is very
everything
very
tracks that he's
graphic and
been
disturbing.
truthful. I've
He
just
is Chris Evans is like the one movie he leads that's not Captain America that he's really good in is Snowpiercer. I think he's really good in
That's
Snowpiercer.
true. That's fair.
I
Snowpiercer's
like
fine.
Snowpiercer a
Yeah,
lot.
it's solid. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of good secondary characters got great secondary. I mean, just little things. The bass player that was a former girlfriend has some great lines and kind of like a cheat. You know what I mean? Then it's kind of like
Mhm.
following Neil. Neil's the bass player that doesn't get a chance, and he gets a chance because he's just as good, if not better, than Scott. There's a ton of these things that make it an Edgar Wright script, make it great. It's incredible.
I have to give a lot of props to Brandon Routh in this movie because he
Yes.
a lot of people have I think held a huge grudge against him for Superman Returns,
Oh,
which I mean I don't think was his fault or anything, or regardless of how one feels about him, it's obviously a lot of people hate it. I mean, whether you think he was a good choice for Superman or not, it's like I don't think like the movie's success or failure hinges on him, but my gosh, he comes in into this movie and he is hysterically funny
mhm.
as the vegan bass player. I absolutely like that's probably my favorite scene overall in the movie is their battle and their interplay. It absolutely cracks me up every single time, and mostly because of his performance. He's just this completely oblivious, stupid person who is really kind of. I mean, you can tell it's like he's he's basically being manipulated by her. It's like he's there because he's good looking and he's talented, and he probably it's like if you want to go on to a meta level, it's like oh he's vegan too, so that's good for the image, but. The
Well, I like
stuff
the
they
fact that
do
they
with the
changed
vegan
his.
element to his character is really, really funny. I love that Thomas Jane pops up as one of the
Oh,
members of the vegan
it was the
police.
best. He and Clifton Collins come walking in, and we're like the vegan police officers, and
Oh
they
my
start going
gosh.
through. No, you had this, drink, so therefore that's milk. You idiot! Like it's just, oh, it's so good. Oh my gosh! And then you had chicken parmesan. It's like what on earth? But they
Chicken
made
is
him look
vegan.
so different, right? They dyed,
And
gave him
even
white
like
hair
even
and all that.
their high five as they walk
Hmm.
away after
Hmm.
he's beaten. It's like every little touch comedically lands during that sequence. Every single one of them. I'm like, gosh, this is really funny stuff. I even love like little touches like him wearing the number 3 because he's the third of the evil
Hmm.
X's. It's like there's
Yeah.
all these nice little visual cues, and the dialogue is really on point. The bass
Yeah.
playing is
Vegan.
actually really catchy and fun to listen to. But yeah, it's just everything about this sequence is just fantastic. I love it.
And her saying, about the dad was going to make him go away to vegan academy, so I dumped him. I'm like, wait, what? It just these lines just come and go so fast. I
You're like,
don't
there's a
always.
vegan academy.
I'm like, vegan academy is a great gag, and especially for
Yeah,
2010, that's way ahead of his time. Like it's just way ahead of his time. So yeah,
basically
it's
being vegan just makes you better than everyone else. It's
uh,
like wow. This
Uh,
joke has aged really, really well.
yeah, it has. It is the whole gag, the whole shtick with Thomas Jane and them coming in, just all of it has aged exceptionally well for sure.
The fact that it's finger guns, but they actually have
Hmm.
laser pointer like coming out.
Hmm.
It's like, gosh, every little thing about that scene is just really, really, and that's it's part of the joy of watching Edgar Wright movies is there's all of these elements visually and in the dialogue and stuff that you can go back to and you're catching all these little details here and there that make the scene work. I mean, there's just layer upon layer upon layer of craft and care. You're like, gosh, he's such a gifted filmmaker. And this could easily have just been a movie that you jump into. You're given a nice. It's probably I think this is probably the biggest budget he had ever had at the time. Might still be the biggest budget. Baby Driver might have been more expensive. I don't know, but at the time, I mean, him getting a $60 million budget that was probably a huge deal for him. But he didn't just phone it in and let the budget do all the work. It's like he put it all to really, really good use. And yeah, I again, going back to something we said earlier, if you release this today, I think this would blow most people's minds as far as its care and its quality. Because these days, money is just tossed into the furnace to
Yeah.
fuel the proceedings. It's really sad.
Um, I will say too. I was like, what are they doing? But the Audrey, it's Audrey Plaza, right? Is her act?
Aubrey Plaza, yeah,
Aubrey Plaza, yeah.
yeah.
The fact that there was the gag about her using the F bomb and they bleep it, and they save the gag for me because there's that quick line from Michael Cera like, "How do you do that with your mouth?" That makes me laugh. It made me
Yeah.
laugh. So then I'm in on tolerating the gag because it's so overdone. So that was really really solid. I don't know that I cared about Anna Kendrick as the sister. I thought that was kind of like, it's a fine little thing because I feel like again it's based on a real life person or story or something. I feel like all of that kind of works.
Yeah,
The band,
I think
yeah.
she is she's the one character I know from the books who is literally based on the writer's sister. I know like I know in the behind the scenes stuff like Anna Kendrick's name tag at the coffee shop, that is the sister's actual name tag that she wore.
Mm,
Um I mean, and yeah, I would agree. It's like Anna Kendrick, like, I think it stands out more now because we know who Anna Kendrick is. Back in
yeah.
2010, she wasn't as popular. I mean, she was, a secondary character in Twilight. She might have had her Oscar nomination for Up in the Air already, or that was right on the horizon. But yeah, it was right before this, so these kind of came out back to back. But Up in the Air wasn't like a huge hit or anything. But Pitch Perfect came right after this in 2012, and I think that's when her star started to rise.
Mhm.
So it's probably a little bit more jarring to see her now. I'm more or less fine with her character because she's not overused or anything. She's really only in about a few scenes here and there. There's a
Right.
nice little dialogue and interplay, but you go back and watch now, you're like, wow, why is such a prominent, well-known actress
Yeah.
in this tiny
Isn't
little
that
part?
funny
It's
that
weird. It's like, well, it's
happens?
because she
Yeah.
wasn't that prominent back
Right.
then.
I will say too, I didn't do any trivia for this. I didn't have time to really get into the woods, but I was scrolling through some of the IMDb photos. Okay, I didn't know Edgar Wright was so short. Like he's a little dude. Like the fact
He's
that Michael
small.
Cera has inches on you, man. Like you are a little dude. Like whoa, whoa. I mean, he's been in interviews with Simon Pegg, who's not a very big guy either. But yeah, I don't
Yeah,
think
he's
Michael.
got to be because I don't think Michael.
He's
I
got to
think
be
Michael
five
Cera is
eight
only.
at the best.
I don't even think he's that because I think Michael Cera is only like 5'9". I'm pretty sure Michael Cera and I are the same height. That's that, which helps me a ton because people joke about how
Oh
I'm
yeah,
really
Michael
Michael
Cera's
Cera,
five
so that
nine.
helps. So Edgar Wright's got to be 5'6", 5'7". I mean, he's little. He's a short guy.
Holy cow! Yeah, 5'7". He looks smaller in this
He
on-set
does.
photo, though. He looks even smaller than
Oh
5'7".
shoot, Mary Elizabeth Winstead's kind of
Oh, look,
towering over
yeah,
him.
and he has those. That she's got her. They got her in boots and stuff for the role, so she's towering over it. Yeah,
But I mean, she's 5'8" outside of the heels, so she's probably still taller than him
yeah.
without the shoes.
Hmm.
Which,
Wow.
by the way, one thing that's it's such a small part of the behind the scenes stuff, but when you see the scene, well, when you see the test footage and then you watch the movie, you're like, wow, it is a part of her character. There's this little segment in the behind the scenes stuff of her just looking into the camera and doing these various like changes of expression because a lot of the storytelling with her is done with expression. And because like when she's disgusted, it. When she's kind
Yeah.
of happy, it. But there's subtlety to almost each emotion. and you see her kind of go through these emotional paces with the camera. It's all done in this little minute-long clip, and you're like, wow, she's really, really good at that. And then you watch the movie with that kind of knowledge, and you're like, yep, she definitely does that in the movie. She's really good with her eyes and just little subtle touches to her facial acting. It's like, yeah, she's pretty good in this. She's not, I've never seen her as like overtly like gorgeous. And her having kind of the punk rock type of hair, you brought this up earlier, that she doesn't immediately come off as like this, bombshell type girl that every guy would want, but there is definitely an allure to her. And I think that a lot of that is done with her expressions.
Okay, that's fair. All right, you're gonna have to sell me on Scott. Kind of a weird. I mean, obviously this has got to be lifted from the comic. It feels shoehorned in at the end. Like I feel like it's things are kind of piecing together fine, and I'm seeing the picture of what they're trying to accomplish, but they shoehorn this in, and I feel like it was a weird clutter. It's not bad. It's like we didn't need. I don't know. It feels like
it feels redundant, honestly, because I'm not familiar with the comics. Everything, I would agree, it's probably from that. I think like the first time they utilize it, it's better if it's just left as that first reference. And granted, I think this kind of harkens back to Edgar Wright almost never fails to pay off a previous setup. So if you see something once in a movie from him, chances are you're going to see it again. So I think this is him trying to pay off something he brought in earlier. But I think the payoff with the Scott thing, I mean, it's a little funny watching him converse with Scott at the end, but at the same time, the point of the Scott thing, it feels just redundant to what we already know, because the whole movie, it's like, yeah, he's been kind of battling with his his worst qualities, and we kind of already know that when Scott shows up, you're like, I guess the joke is that, well, yeah, he did battle all those things. That's why him and Scott can get along now. It's because he's kind of overcoming some of those bad qualities. Yeah, it's not that the joke doesn't land. It's just that the point of it, it's like, it is a little bit odd and distracting. It's like, oh, yeah, okay.
He's come to grips with this part of his personality and his past and whatever. And it's like, oh, we're going to have tea next week. Like, okay, I get it. Like, we know what you're doing. It just feels
it almost makes me wonder if it would have maybe worked better if he didn't simply just show up there right after the Gideon fight. Maybe if the Scott thing had been kind of a part of it, maybe that would have helped it to land a little bit better. But yeah, as it is, it's like, it ends up feeling a little bit tacked on. It's like, I get the point, and I do think the conversing between the two is pretty funny. But it's a bit jarring when it just shows up right after the Gideon fight. You're like, what? Okay.
Everyone praises Brie Larson in this movie. I always hear, but she was good in this, and you're like, okay, cool, that's fine. Note to self. I watch it and I'm like, okay, she's not that different. Like she at least has a scene where she's trying to emote a little bit, but for the most part, I don't think it was anything particularly special. I think it's just.
I think a lot of people. Well, I think a lot of people what they're crediting is the fact that she actually is doing the singing. She's good at it.
I didn't know that. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, she is doing her singing and everything. And I think it's also the fact that she's playing an unlikable character, but there's a self-awareness to the fact that she is unlikable, and she's there's nothing. Unlike some of the other movies where she's playing unlikable characters, this one is not trying to convince you that, no, you should like her. It's like, no, you're supposed to very much dislike her. But also, I think a lot of people who point to this are also looking at the fact that if you watch like behind the scenes stuff of her auditioning, she's very likable seeming. She seems like a very charming young woman. She seems like, to laugh along with jokes and everything, seems to be having a good time. Okay. And what's so interesting is probably the two movies that followed this, Short Term 12 and Room, she's excellent in those. And then after those two movies and after this, that's where you get the turn of her becoming Captain Marvel and becoming more media prominent and a lot less likable and kind of awkward in a lot of ways. Now, granted, to her credit, she seems to be wising up with how she handles her appearances in the media, so I give her that credit. She's certainly not making the same mistakes over and over again, the way like kind of like Rachel Zegler is. Rachel Zegler to me is kind of the worst version of Brie Larson, where she kind of keeps doubling down over and over again. She kind of almost can't help herself. Brie Larson at least seems to be learning her lessons as far as how she presents herself publicly. So I'll give her that bit of credit. Don't know if she's still, I mean, she probably is still, as far as her views are concerned, kind of swallowed up by the Hollywood machine, but at the very least, she's learning to kind of keep her mouth shut about like her views and trying to be too preachy or anything. But yeah, before the whole Captain Marvel thing, she had this and she had 2 other movies where it's like, yeah, she can really act. She's really good actor.
I've heard that.
I highly recommend Short Term 12. I actually think that's a better performance even than Room, which she won the Oscar for.
I haven't seen either one of those, so
they're really good. They're really good.
I have to admit, it's probably the hardest thing for me to sit through the Kong movie, because my wife loves watching the Kong movie. Tom Hiddleston. I don't hate the Kong movie, but I hate her in it, and it's just it's rough having her in it. So
I haven't seen Kong either, because I don't particularly like the MonsterVerse movies that much.
Fair enough. You're not missing a ton.
Yeah, I think they're
just cheap, popcorny kind of movies, and they have so Godzilla -1 is the only thing worth watching in that sort of feel.
Great movie.
Anyway, so with this, I'm going to give it 3.5 out of 5 for me, a solid 7. I'm going to lean towards the rewatchability is probably there, and that's why I'm leaning higher. I really kind of feel 3 out of 5, but I feel I've already watched it twice, and I had a fun time watching it the second time. I was able to appreciate maybe some of the gags a little better, some of the setups a little bit better. I knew where things were going a little easier, so I'm going to go 3.5 out of 5, and I think that's most people probably just enjoy the video game, comic books, all those elements that kind of do it. It makes it bigger for them than me, but I think overall, I think I'm being pretty fair to this film. I think that's how I feel about it.
I would be curious over time what your score would be, because this is a movie that I know for people like myself, kind of that 7-ish out of 10 type score probably is where I would have initially put it. But I would say this at this point, after having seen it over and over and over again, I've probably seen this movie 20 times at least. If I were just going purely subjective, I'd say, yeah, it's like a 10 out of 10, because it's genuinely one of my favorite movies now. Like, it's probably in my personal like top 50 favorite movies. I watch it a lot. Now, if I'm being more objective, I still would go really high with it. I don't think there's a ton wrong with this. Now, I mean, granted, if it doesn't resonate with certain people a certain way, I can obviously be fine with, someone scoring it a bit lower. But for me, I think objectively speaking, this is still really strong. I'd say it's at least a 9 out of 10. I think there's very little really wrong with it. Like, it's incredibly well edited. I think it's very, very funny. It's like comedies. It's difficult for comedies and their humor to hold up on multiple viewings. It's hard. It's like good jokes. It's like there are some movies that are just funny no matter how many times you watch them, and there's other movies that are funny maybe the first couple of times, but they're just not as good once you've heard the joke. This one consistently makes me laugh, makes me smile, makes me feel good, but also just the craft of it, I am really, really impressed with every time I watch it. So yeah, I actually would score this 9 out of 10. I'd go very high on this one. I think it's one of Edgar Wright's. Probably say this is his second or third best overall movie. I think Hot Fuzz is best. I'd probably put Shaun of the Dead over this one, but I'd probably say Scott Pilgrim's right after.
I like them both. I like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz better than this, but I will say that again, when I've only watched it twice, that you may be right. Maybe the rewatchability will give it some bonus points. Before we leave, I
think Hot Fuzz is definitely his best. I actually think that's probably my favorite R-rated comedy of all time. And Shaun of the Dead, I would probably agree, might be better than this one. I think it tackles heavier material and does it maybe slightly better, but I think this and Shaun of the Dead are very, very close for me as far as quality.
I only want to ask you one last thing before we left that was completely unrelated to this, but since I had you, I wanted your take on Edgar Wright reuniting with the writer of this to do the adaptation of Stephen King's The Running Man.
I've actually never seen the original Running Man, funny enough. I need to go back and watch that. It was one of the Arnold movies that, the Arnold movies I grew up with were the ones that my dad liked. And I want to say he had The Running Man recorded on VHS, but we really never bothered to watch it together. So I don't know if that, I'm guessing that's indicative of him not being super high on it. So I never
We may
personally
have to
saw it.
bump that one. We may have to bump that one up then and make sure we get to that one sooner
Yeah,
than later, because
we
that's
may
a
have to.
I actually have a guilty pleasure with that one. I have a fun time. And conceptually, I feel like the concept of it, even though there's a lot of the creative, I've never read the Stephen King short story, but I feel like the concept of it, I'm shocked this hasn't already happened.
Yeah, and I would
I'm
say this.
shocked they haven't turned prisoners into a game show to get. I mean, I literally would be lying to you if I didn't think we'd already get there. And there's no way I don't think we're getting out of the other side of AI where we make AI robots doing
Mhm.
this kind of stuff, because
Yeah.
it's just
I
okay.
would I would say my as far as my excitement level for the Running Man remake is Running Man remake. It's like based on what I know about Running Man's reputation.
Mhm.
I get the feel that most people say it's a decent movie. Some people really like it because it's an horror movie, but I've never heard anybody glow over that movie like it's really great. So it's in kind of that decent category for most people
Mhm.
as far as what I hear. To me, it's like remaking bad movies or maybe making decent movies great is something I think I would like to see more of. So having a director like Edgar Wright getting a hold of the material, I'm like, yeah, I'm actually really excited for it because I'm like, he's such a high quality filmmaker that I'm like, there's potential for him to take what the impression I get is a decent movie and maybe make it into a great one. So I'm personally pretty excited for his version because he, other than Last Night in Soho, he's kind of been doing nothing but hitting home runs. I would even highly recommend his documentary, The Sparks Brothers. It's one of the best documentaries I've seen in the last decade. It's really entertaining.
All right, all right. I just know of the Sparks, but I haven't seen that one either. I will say I agree with you too. I think Baby Driver is a really fun rewatch. I really enjoy Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead way more than World's End. World's End is the only one we haven't done a talk hard on yet, so it'll probably be either later this year or next year.
World's End's one that takes a little while to grow on you.
I
It
can't.
does. It has grown on me. I'm not gonna lie. I do now love the World's End, but it took about 3 or 4 watches before it really started to hit me because
Yeah,
it is the weakest of the three, definitely. But I
yeah.
still really
Some
like
people
it.
love it more. So I love the fact
Yeah.
that his films. I think it's what you said so brilliantly about comedy too, right? It's just one of those things where comedy
Hmm.
is a yeah. Anyway, so and I've only watched like once or twice. I know I saw it when it first came out, and the kids watched it with me, and I don't think they really kind of embraced Adventures of Tintin that he did. So I probably have not been a fair evaluator of that as well, because it did not do well, and that kind of destroyed that franchise's future, if you will, on what was kind of laid out and planned for that. But I do enjoy his
Oh yeah,
work,
I didn't
and
realize he was one of the writers on that. I didn't realize that.
yeah, he
'Cause I
worked
never
on
saw
the
Tintin. Never saw it.
yeah, it was supposed to be this big thing, and they were adapting all this. They're going to do all these, and there's all this stuff with Spielberg and Peter Jackson, and just this is what they're going
Mm.
to do, and it just didn't go. And yeah, so this was a fun time. I appreciate we picked this one. That was a good one. And the next time we're going to do Mary Poppins, because this guy's not seen Mary Poppins, guys. I don't
I
even know.
haven't.
I would think by accident he would have seen Mary Poppins, but tons of cultural references and a legacy, and definitely more musical. Like Mrs. Pops always calls me out on Disney movies because I don't really consider most of the musicals, even though I do get her point. You can't deny Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins is a musical, so it's definitely
Mhm.
one I forget to say I actually like when I talk about musicals, because I don't generally enjoy most musicals. And Mary Poppins is just fun, and I don't know what Gord will say. I really
Mhm.
don't. I'm not sure about substance. I'm not sure about story. I love what it evoked in its time that I got to experience as a kid, and what my kids got to experience. I'm hoping I can get my grandkids into. So I'm interested to see what Gord thinks of all that too, the legacy in the film. So that'll be up next time. But yeah, man, it's been great having you back with me. And folks, for those of you out there watching, sorry about some of the delays and stuff. Scheduling on my end kind of got totally turned upside down. And then Gord and I had technological issues like you wouldn't believe, and I'm still emotionally trying to piece together, spending more time editing now to clean up some of those kinds of problems when they exist. But hopefully this one turned out okay, and you guys are enjoying it and had a good time. And I know Gord, I thank you so much for what you do, man. Everybody, click the description, connect to the Gord, make sure you know what's going on with him. Catch him every week over at MMM. Some of the other different things that he's doing. It's just phenomenal stuff that you do, brother. Thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. Thank you for having me. This is one of my favorite things to do every other week is hang out and talk movies one of us haven't seen before at least. We're gonna have to find a movie both of us haven't seen at some point, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple on that list that neither one of us have seen, so we probably should just do that one.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do that in between, like after Mary Poppins, but before Running Man, because I'm eager to rewatch Running Man again, because the novel is set in 2025. So it's kind of, they kind of missed their remake chance. They should have had it drop this year. It would have been kind of funnier to have it.
Oh yeah.
That's about all I know of the novel. And the fact that the novel is really much more darker and bleak with everyone perishing or whatever. And it's like, Hollywood's not making that movie. Like, that's not how we do things. That's not what they're doing. So. But folks, thank you for watching. Be blessed. Talk hard. I will see you all soon. I am Pops.